What's up, everybody? In today's episode, we're going to be covering some finishing touches on the van, all around our sliding door. We have some exposed low-E insulation and just little things that we need to clean up. Our foam blobs are still showing, so we're going to do these nice finishing touches so that it feels more homey.
Yeah, these are all of the things that I've been procrastinating on doing, and we have to do them all right now.
Yeah.
So stay tuned. Here is the current status of our sliding door. We've been procrastinating on figuring out this step, as well as this trim along the side, and as well above the top where you can still see remnants of our insulation. In this case, this is low E, this silver stuff. So we want to get this all covered up just so it's nice and clean looking, and we don't want to be able to see behind here forever. Stepping inside the van, there's about a 1/4 inch gap between the bottom of the sliding door seal and the van metal. So we're gonna start with 1/4 inch plywood. I'll cut a long strip that goes down this entire length, and then hopefully we'll be able to slide it in and eventually nail it to the sides of our framing and walls. I got this long strip cut out that I just cut to 1 3/4, which was kind of like the depth between the van metal and the edge of our wall. Then this piece here, if you'd like to know how we did it, so would I. All jokes aside, the way that I did this was first, I found the maximum width that this piece of board needed to be. For us, that ended up being 3 inches. So I cut it to the width. Then I set that entire rectangular plank on top of this, attempting to line up the edge with the underlying wall and framing. So I did that. Once I did that, I used the groove in this seal as my trace. So for us, we've been using this, I don't even know what you call it, but it's basically a compass. And I stuck it in the groove and marked my board all the way up and all the way down the width. And then from there, I cut it with the circular saw. So it actually turned out way better than I was expecting, especially because the way that I traced it out was not very easy, especially because you can't clamp anything onto here. You're kind of just holding it with one hand and trying your best with the other. For the rounded corner, it seems to be right around a 4 or 5 inch radius. So my plan is to just cut a 4 or 5 inch square and then cut that in half. And that should give us this nice little area for something to go across. Just doing a little bit of test fitting, and it's looking good so far. It's not perfect, but if you don't look at it, it looks perfect. So this triangle piece I cut out of 3/4 inch plywood. That's because we had a 1/4 inch wall with a 1/2 inch framing, so that kind of fills the gap naturally. Then this little piece that goes in the diagonal, I just cut some bevels on each side so that it flushes up with the piece going downwards, as well as the piece going horizontally. So we're gonna ship that off to the finishing department. Hopefully it gets done in a very timely manner. The next pieces that we need to cut are for our sliding door step. So on the left, underneath the kitchen cabinet, we want to have a little cubby where we could store little shoes or whatever good stuff down there. And then on the right is obviously the step. So we do have a bunch of wires running through here. These are for our B2B as well as our S-Bar gasoline heater. And we have to deal with those. So I guess the options that we have are to build a little platform that these wires can tuck underneath. Or what I just thought through now is that we can gouge out some of our foam board, slide this loom into that little channel, and then build from there. That's kind of beneficial because shorter people don't need to step as high. For example, if we add, say, a 3/4 inch lip here, they would have to step 3/4 inches higher. And it's also a little easier to build because it's not as complicated as building a platform and all that good stuff. So I think we're gonna go that route. So my first steps are going to be to gouge out some of this, enough to fit our loom as well as some sort of supporting structure, since we will be stepping on that. So I don't know the best way to go about this, but at this point I've ran my razor blade just back and forth a few times to start breaking down the pieces into smaller chunks. Oh, Bailey, what are you doing, Missy? She's like, thanks guys for making the kitchen countertop accessible. Here's the results of our little groove. And like I mentioned, I left a 3/4 inch extra gap here so that we could hopefully fit some sort of support in front of it. That way, if somebody does step here, it won't crush the cables, it'll just kind of get caught on this. I don't think it's necessarily necessary, just because this is only like probably a 2-inch overhang. It should be enough to support us with this 1/2 inch plywood, but since it is a step, it will get a lot of wear and tear, and this seems to be like a good option. So I might need to rip this down by about a 1/4 inch just so it'll fit in there nicely, and then we'll go from there. I did rip our pine board down to 1 1/4 inches. That seemed to be the perfect amount where it still compresses the mini cell just a little bit, but not too much where the mini cell is pushing back so hard that our subfloor goes up. With just that board in, it already made such an improvement on how it looks as opposed to having that cable loom running through here. So this board also gives us the benefit of giving us more material to screw into. Originally I was just planning on screwing into the side of our 1/2 inch plywood subfloor, but with this now we have much more material to screw into. So my next steps are to get the riser or the backing of the step installed. So I need to get that cut. I'm probably just going to try to do one long board out of 1/2 inch plywood. The reason I'm going with 1/2 inch as opposed to like 1/4 inch is because I still want to use screws for joinery. Once you go down to the 1/4 inch level, you pretty much are limited to glue and brad nails. So I'm going to get the backing first, and then once that backing seems to be installed in a good area, I will be shooting screws down through here as well as through the backing into this pine. So eventually those screws will be covered up. We will have some sort of threshold or a step trim over this. That way we don't see any of the screw heads poking out. So let's get that backing cut out. The backing is installed, and like I mentioned, I installed it by screwing in from the back itself and top down through our subfloor. So it's coming together nicely. This whole area is really hard to work with just because there's so many odd shapes. For example, you have that little flange over there, and then down here you have like these curved angles. So I'm kind of working around those by cutting out certain things. I did have to notch out a little piece for our gray water as well as the wires running underneath there. The other thing to point out is that since we do have the sliding door rail here, you don't want to interfere with that. So as far as what we're planning to do for covering up this edge is, again, just throw on some more of the step trim. So we'll catch up later. I got the bottom screwed in, so I drilled some pilot holes and then countersunk the heads and then drove them through. So one of the things that you have to watch out for is the sliding door rails. So you want to make sure you're not hitting that. But aside from those few locations, drilling through this step is all kind of contained underneath. So there is like a box underneath the van. So any of these screw heads or the ends of the screws aren't really exposed. So they're all stainless steel anyways. It is heating up way too fast. But at this point, I think we're ready to apply our vinyl to it. So we'll use that same vinyl adhesive and our vinyl flooring will cover both the step part and the backing. Just finished assembling this little cabinet, and as you can see, I added the door, I added the hinges. These are the soft close cabinet hinges that we've been using. They're surface mount since we are using 1/2 inch plywood for pretty much all of our cabinetry. And yeah, it's a nice little bit of space. Not really sure what we're gonna put in there, but we might be able to fit one shoe. And as far as the handle pull, I just opted for the circle because this is kind of the maximum distance we can come out without interfering with the sliding door when it closes. So that's why we're just using a hole there. Then over here, I did recess this little piece a little bit. As you can see, there's a slight gap between here and here. And that's going to be because we're gonna put a 1/4 inch panel just over this to cover up this area. And my plan is just to use brad nails, so I'm just gonna brad nail it into the side of this, somewhere here, and then one down here. The rest of it's kind of just floating, but it's honestly just acting as a little bit of a cover more than anything. I got this panel in, and then as you can see, I tried to cover up my brad nails with some wood filler, and then at least for the seam in the back, which can potentially move, I put this elastomeric putty on it. And yeah, so we're gonna let this dry, and then we'll give it one last coat of paint, and it should be done. The final coat of paint is on, and overall I'm very happy with how it turned out. So it's still drying a little bit, but as far as the step here goes, once we make a run to the hardware store, we'll be able to install that trim that goes over each corner. I missed one piece of our step, in which I have made this weird little contraption, but it tucks into here like so. And of course you have your siding, so this is what we're gonna have a finish paint on. We're debating just painting this instead of putting our vinyl flooring onto it, we'll see. And then I have this 3/4 board for a little support if somebody wants to step there. And then I have this weird angled cut for this subfloor piece because there's a slight taper going towards us. So the way that I did these cuts, and this step is not 90 degrees. So it is a little more than 90 degrees. It's hard to measure what exactly it is. But to get this perfect angle, I used a little carpenter's trick. What I had to do was I just butted up a board against it, and then from there you can mark this line. So that gives you the exact angle that the step is at, which ends up like that. And now we can tuck this in. So I'm gonna paint this, and then I have my support back here, which I'll just either screw in to or brad nail. Probably brad nail. Let's do it. Excuse the mess, but check it out. We got our stair step nosing installed. So we got these out of aluminum, and I never really like working with metal because it's hard, it's messy, and it just kind of hurts at the same time. So I'm glad that it's done. But the workflow that I used was to take my measurements and use tin snips to cut it. I think you could also use like a metal tooth blade jigsaw, but I used the tin snips. So if you use tin snips, one of the things you want to watch out for is to not cut all the way to the tip, or else that will kind of bend the material around in ways that you probably don't want. So pay attention to that. And then before you make your cuts, you also want to try to make all of your holes symmetric. So since ours were pre-drilled, for example, all these 4 holes here, you want to make sure that, say, you don't end up with one stubby bit here and one longer bit here. It just looks a little off, and I think this definitely provides a cleaner look if you have them symmetric. And I was also feeling a little fancy, and I went for a miter here. It turned out all right. It took a long time just kind of cutting things, filing things, test fitting, filing, test fitting, all that terrible stuff. But I'm glad that it's done with, and I'm calling it good enough.
We're gonna put a little bit of backsplash right here. So we ordered some peel and stick tiles. It took a while for us to land on these tiles, but they look pretty nice. Just ordered them, and it's peel and stick, so if we ever change our mind, hopefully it's easy enough to take these off and replace them with some different tiles, fake tiles for backsplash. So I think we're just going to do 1 layer of these at the bottom, and we'll see how that looks rather than doing a full 2-layer. Is that straight? So what is that?
I was making a skirt now that we know how to sew.
Oh, good.
A little tutu.
Tutu.
Yeah, a little tutu.
Tutu.
The curtains that we got feed through like a hole in the fabric. But since our bars come down, I don't know if you can see it from that angle, the bars that hold the rod up are closed. So we might have to notch a little bit of the hole in the curtain so that we can go around it, and then we can go all the way to the edge. Can you see me?
Yes.
Peekaboo!
Oh, hey there! What'd you do?
I put our curtain rod and got our curtains in. This was probably the hardest part of the build, and I'm glad it's over with. Bye-bye.
Is someone coming out? Hi, baby.
Next on our list is to finally cover up this darn edge that's created from our subfloor and our insulation in the subfloor. So we got this rubber edge trim. It's 4 inches wide, but when you fold it in half, half of it's going to go up towards the top, half of it's going down the bottom. And Liana is test fitting all of her clothes in our pillowcase.
I got a bunch of clothes in here.
Pardon that little interruption, but yeah, so our trim piece is about 2 inches on each side. That way we could fold over 2 inches on the top and then 2 inches down the side, which should be enough to cover this entire edge, including the insulation underneath. So we will have to cut some reliefs into this rubber. I was hoping that it'd be flexible enough just to go along the contour of the rear of the van here, but it doesn't seem like the case. But I think still this should be easier than dealing with something rigid like a metal step trim. So we're gonna get to it. I'm not sure what the best way to do this is, but my plan is to start in the middle, which I've already marked. There's a little Sharpie marking on that orange tape. And I'm gonna align that with the center of this piece that I cut to length. And then I'm gonna work my way outwards towards the sides. That way, hopefully, if I need to make relief cuts, I can make them symmetrically across both sides. The trim piece is on now, and I didn't actually have to make any relief cuts since maybe because it's sunny and it was more malleable, but we'll see. So if it does start coming off, we're planning to just go back at it with some 3M90 and it should be good to go. Now that we've been spending more time in the van, we've kind of been learning things that we're missing and that we would like, slight quality of life improvements to our vehicle. So that leads us to our next improvement. It's a huge one. Turning it around, we got a towel holder. It took us a while to find this towel holder, specifically because we were looking for a certain aesthetic as well as a certain dimension to it. So looking at our entire area, there's not really an ideal place to put a towel holder. We didn't want to put something up here and have it dangle because it just doesn't look as nice. So we found this one, which is basically 3/4 in width. And what that's going to give us the ability to do is mount it to the side of our flip-up table. We also wanted it to be a loop like this because in either the flipped up position or the down position, our towel won't fall out, and this is as close as possible to our sink where we'll need the towel the most. As far as installation, it should be really straightforward. Of course, you have your towel holder, you have some double stick tape, so this allows you to forgo hardware and just stick it to something. And then of course you have hardware. In this case you have some screws. They look like number 6 screws, some anchors, and some end caps to hide the heads of the screws. For our purposes, we are going to be installing it tucked up right here. So we could use the double stick tape. However, I think we're just going to go with the screws because that way we can use the end caps, which will cover up our little holes. So while it's not necessarily recommended to screw into the sides of plywood, since this isn't really going to be carrying much weight, hopefully, and we don't torque it, I think we'll be alright just using these screws. There is a mounting bracket that is held on by these 2 Phillips head screws, so I'm just going to take these off so that I can mark these 2 holes where I need to drill pilot holes, and then we can screw it in. Now that I got this mounting plate removed, I marked my 2 drill locations and then drilled the pilot holes. So now I think we can get this all put together. Before driving the screws in, I'm getting the end caps ready. So ours had these little silver pieces nestled inside of these other pieces, and I used a little knife to pry it out. What you'll need to do before you screw it in is slide your screw through here. That way it screws this on, and then you can snap the cap back onto it. Boop. Boop. Ta-da! Check it out. Now we can dry our hands from this position. In this position. That was most definitely 100% the most challenging thing about this fan build. And our next job is to get a little clothes hanger installed onto our closet. We got a 1 3/8 inch socket and rod. These obviously go at the end of the rod. So my first steps are to cut that rod down to size. And since our opening here, I believe, is 10 inches, I'm gonna subtract 1 inch, which accounts for the width of these dudes. So each one is about 1/2 an inch. So I'm just gonna take it down 1 inch. That way it fits. Once I cut it, I'm gonna install these onto the wall. You just screw them in, and then as you can see, one is a closed circle. So you'll slide that in first, and then this open one you'll slide in afterwards. It kind of drops down. So let's get to it. I brought out a jacket just to kind of get a good feel for where I want the rod to go. So I don't think I necessarily want it to be centered, because then some of the arms of our jackets will be sticking out. So it will be offset from center, maybe 1 inch or 2 towards the rear. That way it's not interfering with our door. Here's the finished product. So I went as high up with the rod as I could, taking into account how much I needed for the rod to be able to slip into the socket. Then I went a little bit back just because I wanted the door to have the least chance of interference with the jackets and stuff that we put in here. The other things that I did were I swapped the included hardware, which I believe were zinc, with stainless steel. We've kind of been using stainless steel all throughout the van just because it's a little more sturdy and rust proof. And I also made sure that I put this open side towards the front. And the reason being was that when you are accelerating, you can kind of control that, right? There's very little need to ever have to floor the gas pedal. So in those cases, I think it's the most secure. And then as opposed to braking, which you might need to brake on an emergency or if there's an accident, anything like that, since your butt tends to kick up first when you brake, I thought that this is the most secure, since this side is the locked side or the closed side. In my opinion, I think that makes the most sense. I kind of try to think through these things logically, so that's why I went with it. But if it's wrong, leave it in the comments.
Continuing our finishing touches, we're finally getting to the foam blobs. And by getting to, I should say, we're finally dealing with the foam blobs.
Yeah. A lot of people procrastinate on this step, so.
Yeah. If you're watching this now and you haven't built your van yet, try to just take care of these in the beginning if you know the aesthetic of your van. That way it's just easier, because now that we already have a bunch of our walls on and other things, we have to be a lot more careful with this, and we probably could have had it look a lot more clean if we just did it earlier, but we didn't really want to deal with them, so we procrastinated, and here we are. So what Aaron already did was he removed the foam blobs. That way they're a little bit easier to work with, rather than trying to deal with it on our walls and messing up what we already have. So we have these removed. We're gonna go take them outside of the van, cut some fabric, and cover it and adhere it with 3M90. So we'll walk you through that now.
Sounds good. First step, Liana's gonna go at it with a rag and some isopropyl, clean off all the residue and all that good stuff from the whole 6 months of building this van. I guess 7 months now. And so this is our driver's side blob. We did have to modify it, as you'll see. We had to cut this to fit some framing structures, but the process should be the same. Shaky shake.
Shake, shake.
Assistant is shaking the 3M90, and we're gonna apply it to the foam blob. First, this top face, the visible part when it's installed. So yeah, we're putting it on the visible surface first, and then we'll get a little bit of the edges that aren't exposed so that we can adhere this fabric to wrap around the corner a little bit. So now that this is applied to our blob, we're also applying it to the fabric. So you want to make sure that you're not overspraying, specifically if you have a thinner fabric, because that does leave potential for the adhesive to leak through. but ours is pretty thick, so we're going with it. So these contact adhesives like 3M90, you've got to let them sit a little bit, and then once they're a little tacky, you can combine them and they'll stick. Uh-oh, like that.
Help, help. I had one job. Okay.
There we go. So we'll check back in a second. We got to pin this down.
Pretty sticky.
All right, we got the fabric on. It was definitely a two-person thing, especially if you got a lot of wind. But for all of the kind of weird curves and stuff, if you pull it tight and then slowly kind of use your thumb to round out the corners, it works out pretty well. But at this point now, we're just going down a little bit towards the back. That way it doesn't show if there's things not covering it. It is wrapped. We tried our best. We're a little flustered, but we made it work.
Yep.
So we're gonna try to get this back in. It's a little bit of a tight fit with our ceiling, but we should be all right. Okay. So it's under a little tension, but there is our finished product. We got the last blob covered.
Let's have a look.
And it turned out all right. Don't look too closely. All right, insert the blur now. Beautiful.
Oh, it looks pretty good though. Let's go put it in the van.
Oh. Yes, ma'am. So this one might be also tricky to get into. So we have a lot of competing forces here.
Okay,
looks good to me. We're gonna call our video there. So it was a lot of just tedious things that I didn't really want to do, but they had to be done. So there's still some things that we still didn't cover. One of the things that we need to cover is our D-pillar and our rear doors. So we still have little remnants of kill mat on at least the doors.
And our sliding door could maybe use some touch-ups too.
Yeah.
But we're gonna leave those for now because they're not essential, right? It's like nice to have.
Yeah, for sure.
And we kind of just want to get on the road, so we might just come back to those later. So if you do have ideas on the rear doors or the sliding doors, like things you've seen or something you've done that made it very easy to cover up, let us know. We're open to ideas. We just don't really know what to do with them at this point. So, and we're kind of lazy,
a little bit lazy. So leave a like if you like this video. Helps us out a lot. Leave a comment if you have any questions or have any issues with what we're doing, and then
or leave those if you have any issues. I want to hear it.
And then
we're gonna hit the road, and we're gonna have fun, and we're gonna have a lot of adventures. So
yeah,
you can if you don't like it, don't do anything. If you do like it, subscribe and follow
keep it
along.
to yourself. Yeah. So we're about to hit the road. We got lots of good stuff coming up, so we are happy if you stick around to see that.
Yep, and most notably, we have a van tour coming up, so stay tuned.
Yeah. Toodaloo.
Toodaloo.